Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. You know, it's natural that whenever I hear one of my favorite artists is releasing a new album, that I hope that album is going to be mind-blowingly good, something that I will treasure and cherish for years and years to come. Rarely have I been pulling for an album to be good as much as I was in early 1981 when we got word that Carl Wilson from the Beach Boys was going to release his first solo album. Now, solo albums from the Beach Boys at this point were incredibly rare. 20 years into their career, Dennis had released Pacific Ocean Blue in 1977. There had been some sort of quasi-Mike Love solo releases with his band Celebration, but a Beach Boys solo album was a very rare thing at the time. So we were curious about it. The other thing that was going on was we had observed, we didn't know the full backstory until years later, but it was pretty clear that the Beach Boys had sort of broken into two camps. There was the troubled camp, the guys who had problems. Dennis and Brian were obviously not well. Then there were the professional showbiz guys, Mike, Alan, and Bruce. Unfortunately, Mike, Alan, and Bruce seemed to be the least progressive wing of the band, where the real creative progressive guys were off in the troubled camp. So you had guys that wouldn't produce anything new and exciting and guys that couldn't produce anything new and exciting. And in the middle of this was Carl. Now, at the beginning of 1981, Carl announced that he was taking a hiatus from the band. He wasn't quitting, but he was not going to participate until they cleaned up their act a little bit. He wanted to see them rehearse. He wanted to see them produce new material. He wanted to see them not do the long residencies in places like Las Vegas that were like death to creativity. And we thought Carl's heart was right in the right place. I mean, we thought what he was saying was right on. We really were rooting for him. He famously was quoted as saying, he's not coming back to the Beach Boys until they decide that 1981 is as important as 1961. So as a fan, I thought Carl was right in the right place, and I was hoping he would put together an album that would show him a thing or two. Now, I don't think anybody, including myself, thought Carl was going to come up with an all-time chart topper that was going to stop the music industry dead in its tracks. But we thought he might come up with something that would be sort of a cult classic like Pacific Ocean Blue. We knew he wasn't a real strong songwriter. He had done Long Promised Road and Feel Flows on Surf's Up in 71 and The Traitor on Holland in 73, all three of those being co-writes with Jack Riley. Those were great songs. So he had some promise as a songwriter. He had co-writing credits. He'd written some of the things on the Light album. He'd done some co-writes with Randy Bachman a year or so earlier for the Keepin' the Summer Alive album. So he had written some great things. We knew he wasn't prolific, but we thought, you know, maybe Carl is going to really pull it out of the hat here and really come up with something great. March 27th, 1981, Carl's first solo album entitled Carl Wilson is released. And I remember when I saw this cover in the record store, I was really encouraged. It was a nice cover, particularly coming after the cover of Keepin' the Summer Alive the year before. Nice photo of Carl. Back cover was a little austere, but still, all in all, promising cover. All the songs on this album were co-writes with Myrna Smith-Schilling, who was the wife of Carl's manager, Jerry Schilling. Jerry Schilling had been part of Elvis's Memphis Mafia, longtime friend of Elvis Presley, and certainly had lots of music industry connections. Myrna Smith, his wife, had been one of the members of Sweet Inspirations, who were the backing vocalists for Elvis for many years. Myrna Smith apparently wrote almost entirely the lyrics for this album, while Carl wrote the music. So how's the music? In a word, it's unmemorable. There are song titles like Hold Me, What You Gonna Do About Me, Seems So Long Ago. Very little imagery in the lyric, lots of pronouns, The only thing that really has imagery in it is a song called The Grammy, which the Grammys were sort of famously unhip even then, so it seemed a little out of touch to be singing a song about the Grammys. The music is equally unmemorable. I've listened to this album dozens of times. The number of songs I could hum or remember off the album is very few. It's the kind of thing that when it's on, you go, yeah, this is pretty good. And then you take it off and you'll never think of it again. The one exception, the one song that really stands out from this album is a song called Heaven. Nice acoustic number, beautifully sung by Carl. It was the breakout number right away. It's sort of become if you know one song from a Carl Wilson solo album, it's the song Heaven. Completely uniquely for this time, Carl toured solo to promote this album. And I saw him live at the Center Stage in Canton, Michigan on April 6th, 1981, about 10 days after the album came out. And here is my ticket stub. You won't be able to see it here, but here's a photo of it. It was general admission. The cost of the ticket was $7.50 with a 75-cent surcharge. So not expensive, even for those days. The Center Stage show was the second stop on Carl's solo tour. It was a smallish place with tables where you could, order drinks, and we arrived early, my friend Don Watson and I, and got a seat right up front. We talked to other Beach Boy fans who clued us in that they'd already heard, though this was only his second solo show of the tour, that he was only going to play one Beach Boy number, and that was Long Promised Road. The rest was all going to be stuff from the album. That turned out to be correct. Carl played the album in full except for Seems So Long Ago. I don't think he played that one. I think he also opened with a song called Too Early to Tell, which was not on the album, came along on his second solo album a couple of years later. It seemed like an odd thing for him to open with, but that's my recollection. The only other thing that I recall that he did was, I believe he closed with a version of Sam and Dave's I Thank You, was his closing number. But he did play Long Promised Road. I talked to my old pal Don, who went along with me, and Don remembered a couple of things I'd forgotten. One, Carl played a really wide variety of guitars, which Don, as a musician, really enjoyed seeing. I'd also forgotten that at one point during the show, somebody yelled out for God Only Knows, and Carl looked annoyed. Didn't say anything, but he had a pained expression on his face to have people shouting out for Beach Boy numbers. Anyway, I was so glad that I got to see Carl in person and live on that strange little tour that he did. He spent the summer opening for the Doobie Brothers, did a little more of a solo tour, I believe, in the fall, and then in 1982, there was some sort of compromise reached with the Beach Boys. They agreed to some of the things that Carl was asking them to do, and he rejoined the Beach Boys in 1982 for their summer tour. Carl released a second solo album in February of 1983 after rejoining the Beach Boys, Youngblood. Again, it's a nice cover. It's very austere. My reaction to this when it came out, however, was it looked too much like the other cover. The font is pretty much the same. Again, a nice picture of Carl, but a very similar picture of Carl. This whole album really shouted out that it was more of the same. I don't know why an artist would put out something that was so much like their prior album visually, particularly if the prior album had not really set the world on fire by any means. This album is a little more rocking. I guess that's the reputation it has. It has a little bit of a more new wave keyboards in certain places. Does attempt to rock a little harder. But again, it's the kind of thing that you put on, you go, yeah, it's not bad. And then you take it off and you never think of it again. Again, with a couple of exceptions, it's all co-writes with Myrna Smith-Schilling. The exceptions being there's a cover of the title track Youngblood by Lieber and Stoller and John Fogerty's Rockin' All Over the World. And once again, the lyrics don't help the songs to be any more memorable. They're all song titles like What More Can I Do, She's Mine, Giving You Up, What You Do to Me. Lots of pronouns, very little imagery, very little to help make the music memorable. The final released Myrna, Smith, Schilling, Carl Wilson co-compositions for many years appeared in 1985 on the self-titled and much maligned Beach Boys album. To my mind, these are the two finest Smith-Schilling, Carl Wilson compositions. It's Getting Late and Maybe I Don't Know. They're my two favorite things on the album. Now, both of these compositions list additional co-writers. In the case of It's Getting Late, it lists Robert White Johnson, a well-known Nashville songwriter, and on the former, Maybe I Don't Know, it lists the producer of the album, Steve Levine, and a Julian Lindsay as co-writers. So now I don't know if these songs were really reworked for this album from what Carl and Myrna had turned in, or if they were just holding back some strong songs for the Beach Boys. But I think their finest co-compositions appear on this album. That was it for Carl solo for many years. As we know, he sadly passed away in 1998. It was certainly very sad to lose Carl, and kind of surprising, because I think, like a lot of people, I had assumed that when all was said and done, it would be Carl who would be left to tell the tale. As the most level-headed member of the band, seemingly, apart from Alan and Bruce probably, and also the youngest member of the band, I kind of figured he would be the one someday to write the memoir. And sadly, we never got a memoir out of Carl. In 2015, there was a biography of Carl Wilson released, Long Promised Road by Kent Crowley. Probably necessarily, a lot of this is just the standard Beach Boy biography with slight emphasis on Carl. If you've read any Beach Boy biography, you've got 90% of what's in here. He does talk a little bit more about the equipment that Carl used, the kind of guitars he favored, which musicians might enjoy. It's kind of over my head because I'm not a musician. He seems very in awe of the music, and really the worst thing he'll say about the music is that it was not a fan favorite. He's very, very much a fan, which I guess I can understand, but to the point where there seems to be no critical judgment on the music much at all. It's a Beach Boy. If you've never read a Beach Boy biography, you could read this one. If you have read Beach Boy biographies, there's not much here, not much insight into Carl, really, apart from a few little tidbits. In 2000, this CD was released, Like a Brother. It's Carl Wilson with Robert Lamm of Chicago and Jerry Beckley from America. Carl is largely responsible for 5 of the 10 tracks on here. Again, very austere. There is a small picture in here, if I can get to it, of the 3 participants in the inner sleeve, including Carl there. Again, the music is as memorable as the album cover. Not much to it. There is a song called I Wish You that has kind of a poignant feel to it because it was apparently written by Carl when he knew he was very ill, as a sort of message to his son. So there is sort of a poignant feel to that song, but the music is sadly largely unmemorable. In 2015, a very odd download came along of a song called This Is Elvis by Carl Wilson and Myrna Smith-Schilling. And Jerry Schilling confirmed that this was something he had completely forgotten about until it was discovered. In 1981, being one of Elvis's inner circle, he was involved in the creation of a documentary movie called This Is Elvis. The documentary has footage of Elvis in concert and behind the scenes. It includes recreation footage, and it's got kind of a laughable narration with somebody imitating Elvis's voice to give a first-person perspective, saying things like, "And then I flew to Hawaii where I performed a great concert that was televised worldwide by satellite." It's kind of goofy. So while he was working on this documentary, Jerry Schilling suggested to Myrna and Carl, who were working on Carl's first album, that they create this song for possible inclusion in the soundtrack. And they created this song that is, for one thing, really, really inappropriate for an Elvis documentary. It's so light, it's almost like a lullaby. Myrna takes the lead vocal, but Carl's vocal is heavily in there. It's a curio, it's very strange. Always cool to hear Carl's voice, but one more weird little release that came out of there many, many years later. So, of Carl's solo releases, it's certainly the song Heaven from his first solo album that is the best remembered and most beloved of his solo output. I know when we saw him in Canton, Michigan, 10 days after the album came out, it was Heaven that people applauded when he introduced it, got the biggest applause at the end, apart from Long Promised Road, I suppose. That was the song that really stood out from the beginning and is really the solo Carl song. He was a great voice, great guitarist, guy who always seemed to have his heart in the right place, somebody that is sorely missed. Thanks for watching. Hope you found this interesting. Please let me know if there's anything that I missed. Love to hear comments. Please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Thank you.